Crown of Stones, Chapter 10, by C.L. Schneider. Down on one knee, ripping at the neckline of my linen shirt, I scanned the room. My thought was that after such a glitzy performance, the caster would be vain enough to stick around and admire his work. But my reasoning was flawed, or just plain wrong, because no one was left standing. Then a voice penetrated the haze in my head. "You will not find me with your eyes." It was unfamiliar, soft, and overtly feminine, and I was shocked. After what happened with Taryn Rowe, I expected my Shinri enemy to be a man. "We are not enemies," she assured me. "The spell was not meant for you." Her words were gentle, her voice soothing and breathy. I would have enjoyed the sound if I weren't suffocating. "Air!" I gasped. "You are angry?" "Air!" "Of course." A second later my lungs filled, so harsh and abrupt it knocked me to the floor. "Better?" she asked. "No," I croaked out. Through the spell I felt her bristle. "You're injured. Let me heal you." She didn't wait for my consent. Before I could get a word out, a soft blanket of healing magic rippled across my skin, heavy and warm like wool. It was calming. I could feel it lulling me to sleep. I could hear her voice willing me to close my eyes, telling me that the pain would be gone when I woke. But when I woke, Malak and everyone else would be dead. "Stop," I said, fighting the grogginess. "Him first." I tossed my aching head toward Malak. "He's Langorian." "I know what he is. And I want him alive. I want them all alive." "You would save those that tried to kill you." "Not all these people were a part of that." "Those without weapons would have stood by and watched you die without a moment's guilt." "I see no different." "I do." After a small delay, her healing spell lifted, and I felt awful again. I crawled the short distance to Malak's side and struggled to pull him into my lap. Weak, strangled sounds were coming out of him. Very little air was going in. "What are you waiting for?" I shouted at her. "I swear, woman, if he dies, you die. Make your choice." There was no response. I was hoping the silence didn't mean she was going to call my bluff. Unmistakably, the woman owned a magical stamina that far surpassed mine. If I went after her with a spell and failed, I'd be at her mercy. If I went after her with my newfound access to the Crown of Stones, I wouldn't fail, but my conscience was full enough without adding a tavern full of deaths to the tally. There was only one other way I could think of to handle her. It was desperate and foolish. It was something I shouldn't even consider. Carefully, I slid Malak to the floor. I stood up and addressed the woman in Shinri. "Keta Runa Arena! Do you hear me? Keta Runa!" I took a deep breath and said, "An oath for a life!" translating the words into Raylan to remind myself what a complete horrible idea it was. "Grant my request. Save these people, and I offer you gratitude. Twofold," I threw in. "As in the ways of the Empire. For their lives you would bind yourself to me in such a manner?" "Why?" "My own reasons." "And you will do for me without question?" Anticipation overrode the sensual nature of her voice. "Twice." I didn't like how happy she was at the prospect, but Malak was turning blue. "Yes," I vowed, "to depths to repay as you see fit." "An oath made in the old ways is governed by them as well. If I come to you, and you deny me, I have the right to compensation. Your life could be forfeit if I so choose. I understand how the oath works. I won't refuse you." "You cannot refuse me." "I cannot," I echoed her, and the words left a cold chill on my skin. Immediately I wished for a way to take them back. My pledge to her was irrational and thoughtless. It was a mistake that I had no doubt would hunt me down and bleed me later on. But it worked. Already Malak and the others were sucking in great gulps of air, and I couldn't sense the woman's presence anymore. She'd taken my offer and ran. I looked down at Malak. "It better be worth it." Coming around, he squinted at me and groaned some unintelligible response. I didn't bother asking him to repeat it. I was so exhausted and sore I just fell down a little better watching the ones that made it stumble to their feet. A few stumbled all the way to the bar. Most fled into the growing darkness outside. The staff, or what remained of it, diligently started the enviable task of cleaning up. One of them lit the earth, and I could see the color creeping back into Malek's face. He was still drawing in deep, fractured breaths, and his hand was shaking like it was midwinter, causing the multiple rings on his finger to clack at a nervous rhythm. Thick and gold, the rings were all similar, but for one, a black pearl, cut in half, and set in the middle of a plain band of deep blue coral. Its design was simple for a nobleman. Understated even, if black and blue weren't the colors of the Raylan flag, and if black pearls, due to their worth and scarcity, weren't a trinket afforded only by members of the Raylan royal family. My interest in his identity piqued. I was still studying the pearl when Malek moved his hand up the front of his cloak. His finger stopped. They closed on the pin, holding the cloth together at his neck with a kind of desperate relief that seemed out of character. Malek must have thought it was too, as his regal features held the expression so briefly that by the time he dropped his hand, the outward manifestation of his anxiety was gone. Mine was all over me. Seeing the clasp wasn't a normal circle as I'd first thought, but a golden serpent swallowing its own tail. My pulse started racing. Like the pearl ring, the pin was a symbol of royalty. But it wasn't Raylan in origin. The serpent was a sign of Langor, handed down from father to son. I'd last seen the clasp on the cloak of King Draken, the morning of our last battle, just hours before I unleashed the magic of the crown of stones. I glanced down at the ring, then up at the serpent again. I looked at Malek's finely crafted Kalish sword, his expensive Raylan boots, and wondered, thief? But that didn't sit right. Why do they bother with walls if they have no floor? Malek grumbled, slapping at the dirt on his cloak as if he stood. He reached an absent hand down to help me up, and I stared at it. When he realized I had no intention of taking his offer, he pulled his arm back with a hiss. Yanking the nearest chair upright, Malek sat down and began fiercely dusting the floor from his trousers. "Ungrateful fool," he murmured. "I'm not ungrateful. I'm skeptical." I winced as I sat up and leaned against the bench behind me. "I haven't met a Langorian yet that hasn't tried to kill me. Perhaps it's because you're always trying to kill them." His remark pulled a shaky grin out of me. I'd get it out of the owl if it was a Raylan tavern. But the Kalish generally don't give a damn about me. And the Arulians, after all this time looking for revenge, allying with a Langorian, doesn't make sense. "So you're ill-mannered and skittish. Wonderful. No offense, Neferin, but skittish doesn't come close. With your dialect, your clothes, and your face, I have no idea where we stand right now." Malek stared down at the sharp angle of his nose. "Did you just insult me?" I recalled my words. "Possibly." "What is that, then?" "Neferin." "Don't do that. Don't speak Shenri with a Kalish accent and shove it out of a Langorian mouth. It sounds wrong." "Remind me why I rescued you." "I have no idea, and it isn't an insult. Neferin is a title, a way of addressing a nobleman, like a lord or a prince." Malek's eyes grabbed mine. "You believe me royalty. Why?" "That fancy Kalish sword, for one. King Sauron has a weapon of the same craftsmanship, though his is without that special second blade." I glanced at Malek's hand. "The ring makes you possible heir to Rayla." Then up at his neck. "The second pinned at your throat says you're currently ruling the fine land of a realm of Langor, except Draken's sister Jillian is queen there, and she has no husband." "Oh, Jillian has a husband. She married Prince Gwyden Rourke about a week past." My mouth gaped open. "Gwyden? Sauron's son. You're telling me Kael's prince is married to Langor's queen?" "Former queen. Jillian gave up her crown in Langor to be princess of Kael. Though of course that means when Sauron dies and Gwyden inherits the throne, Draken's sister will rule Kael at his side." I really didn't like the sound of that. "How the hell did that happen?" "Well, there was a wedding," he said dryly. "It was your typical over-the-top, Kalish affair of lavish debauchery, and that was just the ceremony. The feast after lasted for days. Don't ask me how many, because it's all a bit of a blur. In fact, I believe half the kingdom is still hung over." I missed something. "That, my friend, is a very large understatement." I gave him an irritated frown. "Why would Sauron ally himself to Langor? He hasn't. Well, not officially, perhaps. Perhaps Sauron was simply hoping to disguise Gwyden's worthlessness with a strong match. A good woman can make all the difference, you know." "She's Langorian." I said plainly. Malik's eyes narrowed. So? I've seen Lungorian women. The only thing good or strong about them is their thighs. So whatever Guidon is up to by taking Jillian as his bride, there's no way Saren would approve. You surprise me, Troy. Being born of a persecuted race, I expected you to be a bit more broad-minded. We're not all slobbering brutes, you know. You're right, Malak. You're a fraud, or a thief, or a prince. Watching me, he grinned. My identity troubles you that much? Just the Lungorian part. I'm half Lungorian, and I was raised Kaelish. I can hear that, but you're only Kaelish on the outside. That's not good enough for you? I said enough, and a whiff of his temper poked through. You know I could have let them kill you, and I could have used magic and killed them all, including you, but you didn't. No, I didn't. I thought of the Shinri woman in my head and what I promised her. I guess that makes us both fools. A trace of somberness settled on Malik's face as he got up from his chair. What it makes us, my friend, is outcasts. He reached for me again. If we don't help each other, no one else will. Relenting, I let him pull me up. Thanks. Malik's response was a satisfied grin that was just begging to be punched. Curbing the urge, I went in search of my swords. I spotted them against the wall on the far side of the room. Someone had actually collected my weapons into a nice pile instead of stealing them. Today was one surprise after another. I went to retrieve them, and a woman's hand came over mine. Behind me, her long, delicate fingers trailed over my wrist and up my arm. In the wake of her touch, my skin tingled. It was impressive, considering a shirt and leather bracer stood between my arm and her fingers. So you're back, I said, taking a guess, and in person this time. Eager to see the face of the Shinri woman I indebted myself to for Malik's life, I started to turn around. I didn't get so much as a glimpse. Out loud, soft and husky, she said, "Now I will heal you." And I was unconscious before I even hit the floor.